That's 3 parts of our site down so far. It's important to note when we say parts of our site down, we're not talking about the site actually being down, except technically it is because we haven't published it yet. We're going to build this grid-based card section. We'll build out our structure, we'll build the actual cards, we'll style everything. And
everything?
Literally everything. And we're going to cover how to use selectors to style things like headings without needing classes. Let's jump right in to the first part, which of course is the structure. So here we are on the site we've already built. Let's add another section. We'll just collapse this section. Again, our previous section was all these logos. Let's add another section. And we'll drag it below this section. All right, in selector, we're going to add our section class. And what do we want to do for our structure? So there's a few different things. Well, one, we're going to need a heading. So let's drag in a heading. This will be an H2. And of course, we'll want to add this content real quick. We'll double click to edit and we'll make the text say
features for every
need. Slightly faster than I was saying it. So if that's our heading, there's 2 more structural components we need here. The first, of course, is a container to keep everything neatly bound towards the center. So let's drag in a container and let's get that heading in the container. But one more thing to add to the container. That's our primary structure for these cards, and that is a grid. There's a few ways to add a grid. Of course, we could go up and add just a div. When we drag a div into the container, we can simply go to grid, click, and now it's a grid. It's a 2-column, but in our design, we're going to do a 3-column. Does that matter right now? No, we could always change this. Let's hit plus for 3 columns though, and then press done. And that's our main structure, a section, container, a heading, an H2, and a grid. Let's start building out the cards in our grid. But before we do, a few things to note. There's a few ways to go about doing this. We could design our card outside of the grid, but just so we can keep everything neat and organized, we're going to design within the context of this grid. So here's how a grid works. We can add anything inside of a grid. So we can just click and drag any elements we want inside our grid, any element we want for our features. Let's say we have this one, let's say we make it an H3, and we can just leave it heading, or we can just call it the first one, which is Daily Digest. We could, let's do Command E to save some time, and we'll do a paragraph. We know we're gonna need an image, Command E, and notice how as we do each of these things, it's loading each element into the next available cell. That's how grids behave by default. These cells aren't like cells in Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. Those kinds of spreadsheets are destructive. In other words, if you delete a row or you delete a column in any of those apps, the content gets deleted too. But with CSS Grid, when you're adding items, the cells act as guides. Each cell can hold one element at a time. So what do we do to group multiple elements? Well, of course, we can use a div. So let's add a div. Same thing here, Command E, we'll just type div, press return, and now we have a div. So we can position all of these things inside the div, and there's a few ways to do that. We could use the navigator, just drag something like the image into the div. Let's check that. We have the image inside of the div, that's right. Or we can just click and drag, but notice what happens sometimes when we're clicking and dragging. These things don't necessarily go inside each other. We're not actually nesting here. So if we want to nest, and we notice that everything's being pushed around, we can just hold down Command on Mac or Control on PC, and we can drag
it in.
Yeah, drag it right into that div block. Let's demonstrate that again. We'll hold down with the Daily Digest selected, this heading selected, let's hold down Command or Control on Windows and drag it right in. So Perfect. What do we have? Image, thank you very much. Image, heading, and paragraph. That's the primary structure of our cards. Let's move into styling. So we want this to look right. Right now it doesn't look right. Let's first go to our image and replace it with one of our first images. So this will be Daily Digest. Press that and close out.
Let's give it a class.
Give it a class, all right, an image. So the reason we're gonna add a class now is because as we're making multiple cards, we want the ability to style these things a little bit later. So it's a great note, so let's go and add a class. Let's call this feature image. That's it. We'll do the same thing on the div, basically the cell itself that's holding the other things. We can call this
card.
Card, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Is that card?
Creative.
Yeah, it's card. What'd you say?
Creative.
Well, you said it, and it's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So now that we have one of those, we could copy and paste once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5. So we have 6 total. And we could just replace the content. We could do that. But right now, let's work on styling. Because we just created that, as you said, creatively named card, because we did that, we can hold down Shift and adjust padding on all 4 sides at once. That's one way to do this. We could do that. But because we have a grid, we can also adjust the grid gap. So let's edit grid, take a look at that gap. And this is essentially the space between, and we can unlock this. And of course, just like we did up here with these logos, we could adjust the space between the columns and the space between the rows. For this, let's do something even. What do you say, 30 on all sides?
30 is great.
30, let's do 30. 30 pixels, that looks good for now. So what's left? Well, first off, there are 6 different features, but they don't say daily digest for all of them. We actually have to update our content. So while we're going through the styling, we might be taking a look at this sort of like lorem ipsum text, which you can actually see. There's lorem ipsum text. We have placeholder text. We want to make sure we replace that with the actual content. We're going to do the whole thing, but we're going to use the magic of post-production to speed this up. But that is it. That's the content. So a few more things to change. With our div selected, so this is really important, with our div selected, this card, we can make some other style changes. For instance, we can say all of that text right now is left aligned. If we want, we can just align center. And because we know, we can actually go in really specifically here and say, this paragraph, with this paragraph selected, where is it getting its information? Where is it getting this styling? How does it know to center? Because we just set it on that div, right? We set it on the card. If we click our paragraph and we want to know where is that align coming from, well, we can click at any time on any of these amber indicators. So we'll click align and we'll see that value is actually being inherited. That text value is being inherited from card. And that's the magic of inheritance on the web. We can make changes on parent elements, especially text-based changes, on parent elements, and they'll pass all the way down to their child elements. Can we override them? Yes, if we wanted on this paragraph to make it right aligned, we can do that. However, now the label's blue. That's because we've made a change on this paragraph, on this particular paragraph. It automatically created a class. We don't want that, it's hideous. We can always go in and see if we reset, it will now inherit the value from card again. But for us, we just want to delete that class. So it's now, there's no specific information, it's inheriting that text style from the card. And we created that paragraph class by styling that right there for the demo. We can always go into our style manager and clean up any unused classes. So we click that, it says, the following styles are not associated with any page elements. Paragraph, are you sure? You can read the whole thing here. Remove, let's remove it. We've now reduced some of that CSS. All right, a couple more things here on styling. The feature image, rounded edges, assuming something.
3 pixels.
14 pixels?
Nope.
3 pixels.
Yeah, actually looks pretty good, but it's 3 here.
That's 3 pixels.
So the heading is a little bit tight to the grid. We could add
that's
some
right, over here.
spacing, right?
We could add some bottom margin on that, or if you want your grid, let's call this, by the way, let's rename this feature grid. And you're thinking what, add top margin?
Yeah.
Push it off? What do you think? 60 pixels? 100 pixels?
No, 100 too much. 60 is perfect.
So it's 100 too much, so you want to go negative? You want to go negative what?
Let's do 60 here.
60. All right, 60 pixels.
Perfect.
And then center the heading?
Yeah.
Okay,
Let's
let's
do
just
it.
center the heading.
We can also name it feature heading.
Okay, we'll call it feature heading or just feature heading. And by the way, all we did there is rename that class. It didn't create another class, it's just keeping organized. But that's styling our cards. And this is a really good moment to transition from styling into our H3 selector, starting with what is a selector? Now, we covered this when we went through CSS on Slack's marketing page, where we used a selector. In that case, it was all H2 headings. We selected those H2s and made everything Comic Sans. But a selector, of course, is anything that's up here. The selector is selecting elements of a certain type, whether they're selected by their class, the class that's applied, or the type of element it is. The selector selects those elements and applies these styles to them. So how does that work with something like H3s? Well, with any of these H3 selected, notice how we did add a class called featured image or feature image on all of these. We created it on one, we copied and pasted. That means a change on any one of these, like a width of 20 pixels, will apply to all of them.
Maybe it's tiny,
a little
though.
tiny, so maybe
Yeah.
30 pixels
No.
will apply to all of them. Fortunately, we have an undo button. Let's undo. What we didn't do is apply a class to these headings. Fortunately, we can style all H3s, really all H3s, H2s, H1s, images, links, whatever. We can style all of these things at once. With the heading 3 selected, let's go up to selector, and instead of clicking to type a new class or to add an existing class, let's go down to HTML tag. So this is a selector for all H3 headings. Here's how it works. First, let's click all H3 headings.
Done.
Yes, it is done. We are now editing all H3s on the page. All H3s in the site, actually. So how does that work? Well, let's do something wild. Let's make the color pink. So we're going to make it a pink. And that means if we grab, even if we don't style it, or even if it's not in this grid, if we grab a heading 3 and put it somewhere else, maybe up here, and we change it to H3, it is now pulling in those styles without applying a class. Now, what you don't see is Stacy off screen, quite literally, on the production monitor, absolutely losing her mind with happiness right now because we've made this pink. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to change it back because it doesn't match the rest of the design.
I'm sorry, Stacey.
So let's delete heading and we'll go back to our H3. Any of these we can select. And again, it's not a class, but we will go in, all H3 headings, and we'll remove that. Let's go to color and let's reset that color. And what we might wanna do here is maybe make it a little bit smaller, just so there's that clear visual hierarchy between the H2, which is a little bit larger. Maybe what, 21 pixels?
21 looks good.
Okay. And we can also reduce, right now it's 10 pixels at the bottom. We could say something like 5 pixels, just make it a little tighter so it's really clear that this heading is related to that paragraph.
That looks awesome.
So that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Perfect.
We built this entire section, 6 cards using the magical properties of CSS Grid. We built the structure, we built the cards themselves, we styled everything, and of course, we modified, just a moment ago, we modified all H3s using the all H3s heading tag. We have just 2 more things to build after this, the form and of course the footer. So let's jump into the form next.
Piano. Now that we've gone through this card design, show us your card design. Violins. Whether you're following along here or you build your own card design, we want to see it. Harp. We're gonna take our favorite card designs and we'll give you an expenses-paid trip to Webflow's headquarters here in San Francisco, where you can work alongside our producers and designers, cellos and basses. So use hashtag Webflow101 and share your card design on Twitter.